Let me just go ahead and jump in when I talk about just simply my thoughts on affirmative action. First of all, whenever we have this disagreements, we got to recognize a couple of things that oftentimes we either think about disagreements from kind of a purely intellectual vantage point, or we talk about our disagreements from a purely kind of relational vantage point. And so there's oftentimes we come at this situation in two variety of different ways, right? In the highly intellectual, it's sort of like this. If we just imagine if the problem is a cold and dark world, that a highly intellectual will bring is like a light post. It will bring light, but the problem is it doesn't bring it. So it solves one problem, but it doesn't solve the second problem of warmth. It brings light, but not warmth. The second problem is that it's say in a cold and dark world you bring heat, right? So you bring a space heater. That solves one problem. It brings heat, but it doesn't bring light. And so what we do, we have a tendency to do anytime we have problems or we have conflict that either we bring light to the world, let's put that in, we're highly intellectual, we come at problems like a theologian, or highly relational. We come with this highly relational kind of approach where the facts really don't matter as long as people are being able to be touched or felt or seen. And so we see kind of these two different approaches. But I would like to introduce a third way, right? Not coming at it from a highly intellectual or theological solely vantage point, or even coming at it from a purely intellectual or relational vantage point of just making sure everybody is kind of the playing field is equal, but that we would come at it from a missiological vantage point, and that's what say would be building a bonfire. And when you build a bonfire, it answers a couple of questions. It brings about both warmth, but also it brings about light. And I think that that is what it is important for us to recognize when it comes to what we're talking about, right? It comes to this idea of um, coming at the issues of something like affirmative action, both um, theologically with our minds, but also relationally. But ultimately, bringing those two together comes together and it talks about this concept of missiologically. How do we care about our people on the other side of the fence, right? At the same time, not kind of throwing out all intellect. I think that that is so critical when we begin to wrestle with tough issues, especially issues that come on the other side. And there's a couple of things that we got to understand when we do that. The first thing is that anytime we have a debate or disunity around something, we got to understand two principles. One is that people are people. Like, no matter if they disagree with you or not, we are all made in the image of God. People are people. And the second thing that we got to recognize is that everybody has a story. There is no individual who comes up and is looking at any of these things from a purely objective vantage point. That it's your story that has influenced you to bring your vantage point to see things the way that you've seen things. So if you've grown up hearing certain things or coming at it from a certain perspective, you will always come at it understanding that you have that cultural lens or background in understanding that. And the flip side, and that goes on all sides. So if you feel like you've been discriminated against, you will come to a world kind of hesitant and thinking about like, hey, this world has been discriminated against me, and I'm always going to be conscious of that type of discrimination. But if you feel like you have not been or have not seen it, or then you're going to come from that posture. So you're going to come at it from that vantage point. So understand, people are people and everybody has a story. Recognize that whenever you come up to issues that you got to come at it not just as a theologian or just kind of like all purely relational, but you got to come at it missiologically. How do I reach people on the other side? How do I help to convince people and create a platform where I can engage with people in this? And so what does that mean when it comes to this situation of affirmative action? Obviously, we won't go through all the technical details of it. There's many people who can share all of those things. But I think when it comes to the believer as the church or the Christian, when it comes to this, I think it's important for us to address this. That affirmative action existed in the 70s, and it started in the 70s. Why? Because it was about bringing dignity. to all people, and recognizing that everybody is in the image of God, and that everyone needs to level the plane. We need to level the playing field for all people to do that. That's not just a worldly thing, but that's a Christian thing. That we have seminaries that we were not allowed to go to. There are so many things that we were not allowed to do because of simply the color of the skin. And so it's sort of like, we got to level the playing field. And you can't just say, all right, it's time, you guys can now do it. And then now the playing field is now leveled. It's sort of like playing the game of Monopoly. And I heard this from a guy named Michael Stewart. He was just like, it's like playing a game of Monopoly. And it's sort of like saying, hey, because you're black or because whatever, you can't go around the board the first two times. We're going to go around the board the first two times, and we're going to, wherever we land, we're going to buy up the property. And then the third time around, after that, then we're going to allow you to start playing, right? That's not, the playing field is not equal, right? It's sort of like when I'm going around the third time, it's like, all right, now everything is fair. Let's go now, and let's just kind of make sure everything is equal, but we can't give you any advantages because, all things got to be considered. And so we recognize that there needs to be some type of advantage. So the question becomes is, how long or what do I need to do in order to level the playing field? And in this Monopoly example, it may be, all right, for the next two rounds, maybe I'm going to go around. Maybe that's it. Or for the next two rounds, you can only buy every other. Like, I don't know how you level that playing field, but you got to do that. And so when they first came up with affirmative action, that was what was said. It was just like, hey, we know that in order to level the playing field, this is going to be done for a certain period of time. So the question is when is that time up? And so I think it's important that we recognize that this was going to come to an end, but we're going to disagree of when that end needed to happen. And the question that we need to begin to answer as a believer is the playing field, right? Are we fighting for our brothers? Are we fighting for our sister? Are we fighting for the marginalized and disenfranchised? Those are the things that we need to do, because the Bible is very clear that we are to fight for the marginalized, the disenfranchised in a variety of different states. And so we need to do that. Why? Because people are people, and we need to fight for the imago Dei, the dignity of all people. So it is important for us to first understand the posture in which we're approaching things, that we ought to do that. So a biblical example of this is in Acts chapter 6. And in Acts chapter 6, we see this taking place. There was discrimination. The playing field wasn't equal, so the church had to address it. In Acts chapter 6, it says this, verses 1 through 7. In those days, as the disciples were increasing in number, so that everything is happening, things are booming, benefits are taking place, there arose a complaint by the Hellenistic Jews against the Hebraic Jews that their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution. Okay, so there is a situation. There was not equal distribution that was taking place. And so there was a systemic problem that was taking place, that it wasn't just one or two individuals being overlooked, but there was a whole group of people being overlooked. And that group of people being overlooked was identified as the Hellenistic Jews. Understanding context, that they are in Jerusalem. So the Jerusalem people, in Monopoly analogy, had a couple of times around the board. They already had the relationships, they already had the networks, they already had the systems in place, the connections that were going on. So the Hebraic Jews had a leg up, right? But then the Hellenistic Jews that grew up outside of Jerusalem, that were coming in, that had different culture, different background, they didn't act the same. They didn't act, they had this difference. There was differences, cultural differences, that they identified. These Hellenistic Jews were being overlooked. And so what did they do? They brought in some type of system to help level the playing field, right? Not to bring an advantage to the Hellenistic Jews, but to answer the problem of not overlooking the Hellenistic Jews, right? And leveling the playing field. And so this is what they did. This was a problem that needed to be addressed to the church. Understanding that this was not, in some, we're talking about how you're going to eat, right? How we're going to eat. So we're not talking about just simply what some people would say biblical and all those things, but we're talking about like, hey, some of our brothers, some of our sisters feel like they're being overlooked in providing some of the basic needs, right? So this is a situation that is both spiritual, it's biblical, it's in the realm of the church. We ought to have something to say about, because they had something to say, because the daily distribution of food right? They were there. So what they said was they summoned, verse 2, they summoned the whole company of the disciples and said, it would not be right for us to give up preaching of the word to wait on tables. Brothers and sisters, select from you among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit, and whom we can appoint this duty, so we can devote ourselves to the ministry of the word and the ministry of prayer. The proposals seemed pleasing to the whole company, and so they chose 7 men. All right, so this is where we got to understand. They wanted to address this both from an intellectual, but also they want to address it from a relational. And then they recognize, how do we missiologically address this issue? What I want you to recognize is the names: Stephen, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenius, Nicholas, and he was a convert from Antioch. They were to represent. So a couple of things that you recognize in Acts chapter 6. They appointed people from the groups, that people who came in, who understood the faith, that were of good report, had the qualifications, right, of integrity and all those things. And then they appointed them for the purpose of addressing an issue of the people that felt like they were being overlooked. They didn't so they recognized that the people that were being overlooked, these were all names of people who were predominantly Hellenistic in nature. They didn't have kind of like some of the old Hebraic names. They were more Hellenistic in nature, that they needed to come to address the issue that they were feeling overlooked. I think that that's a critical thing. So that was one thing that they seen, because again, it was the purpose of the church about bringing up dignity. So when it comes to affirmative action, the question is as the church, we oftentimes need to make sure that we are making sure that that we're not overlooking. We're not overlooking people that may be marginalized and disenfranchised. And I think that that's an important factor that we need to do. We got to also understand that we need to level the playing field, right? That when we talk about leveling the playing field, it's not to say that Jesus says the poor will always be among us. So we do need to understand that the poor will be among us, but we also need to understand that it's our responsibility to recognize the poor and then also fight for them, right? Because again, what we see all throughout the scriptures, right? Every 7 years, every 50 years, right? You were to leave a part of your wealth, right, to the marginalized and disenfranchised, to give them a playing field so that they can also be raised up, and so that they can live and they can meet their basic needs, right? And it's not just simply about fighting for your rights, all right? The other thing that we recognize, again, where we see them raising them up, them fighting for, making sure that the level playing field, so that we're not just simply, we need to answer this, but we're not just answering it in a way where we're just now giving the advantage to the Hellenistic Jews, but we're leveling that playing field, and so we don't have to leave our minds just to relationally make sure people are seen. We got to do a both and. The problem is again, with most arguments, we answer as theologians. We're just simply asking the question, is it biblical? Is it biblical? Is it biblical? I think that's a great question, but that's not the only question that we need to answer. We definitely don't want to stand outside of biblical. That's why I always use the scriptures to help talk about our arguments. But we also need to understand that there is parameters. We are containers of that missiology. If we are just shining a light but not bringing any warmth, then there's a problem to that as well. And when people oftentimes just says, well, let's just look at the facts, that's a dangerous thing. And Paul speaks directly to that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, he says, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything builds up. No one is to seek his own good, but for the good of the other person. This is a critical thing, especially when it comes to arguments, and especially when it comes to this issue of affirmative action, right? As the believer, if we are solely fighting for our rights in any way, in any vantage point, then what we are doing, that we, to some degree, become a hindrance to the gospel. Paul, if you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 8 all the way through 10, he's talking about, and he summarizes it at the end of this verse. He says, listen, there's an argument about eating meat sacrificed to idols. And basically, to wrap it up, he's saying, listen, here's the truth. If we want to say theologically, if it's only theologically, you're right. There's no such thing as idols, because God is, and so we can God is one. He's the one true God. And basically, you can eat all that you want, right? He says, however, relationally, we got to consider if it becomes an offense to your brother, then he says, I will never ever eat meat ever again, because we don't want to be a stumbling block. And so this is what Paul, as a missionary, recognizes, that it's not just about being theologically right and arguing right, but it's about reaching over the table. And so for us, we recognize, because we got centuries for African Americans to be overlooked, for the church to take on the manner of saying, like, it is important for us to make sure that we're not we're not both intellectually throwing off our theology, but we're also not overlooking our brother, is so critical. It is so critical. And I think that too many of us are just answering these issues as theologically, and we're not doing it, or too many of us are just answering it relationally. Like, we're just thinking about our people, our kinsmen, and we're just saying, like, hey, like, our people are getting left over, but we're not bringing both, that there's both a theology and a relational that is important, that brings about missiological kind of coherence. That righteousness is about right relationship. There's a justice and there's a relationship and reconciliation component. So when we think about it, it is important that we do that, that we are fighting for the marginalized, that we're leveling the playing field, that we're answering the question, because we knew it was going to end at some point, is this the case? Are we leveling the playing field? So we got to understand those things. And so here's 3 things that I think that is important for us to recognize when it comes to this, and I'll let you guys go. Number 1, that when it comes to wrestling with any issue, and especially issues like affirmative action, where we're talking about the dignity of people and making sure that the playing field is leveled for all people, not we're trying to give advantage to one or the other, but that it's a level playing field. Then we got to recognize these 3 things. Number 1, that we got to be generous. We got to be generous stewards. That we got to recognize and we got to understand the ramifications, not just for myself or my family or even my people, but I got to understand how that things that benefit me impacts other people. So how things that benefit African Americans may, impacts the Asian Americans or white America or Hispanic America, and how things that are benefiting white America impacts, African Americans and Asian Americans. That we got to understand that, like, hey, we want to level this playing field, even though that there's always going to be disparity, right? We got to level the playing field of opportunity to all people, right? So it's really important that we do that. So we got to be generous. And then the second one is that we got to recognize our blind spots. Number 1, be generous, right? Understand the ramifications. Number 2, recognize your blind spots, right? We got to recognize, when we're talking about our blind spots, is that when we are hiring, let's just talk about hiring practices, because that's what we're talking about, specifically affirmative action. I have worked for large corporations that are very missiologically and very driven about trying to reach the thing. What I've recognized is that people are not always hiring the best talent. We always think about it's the best talent. That is not the truth. Most people are not hiring the most talented person. And if anybody tells you that, it's a lie. Because you have heard the statements that when people are actually hiring, there's a few things. People are talking about their competence, which is one element. They're talking about their capacity. I think that's another area. They're talking about their character, but that's another area. And then third or fourth, they're talking about their chemistry. And I think that is an important factor that oftentimes we overlook, is our chemistry. And when you recognize that, when you are a hiring person, you recognize your job is on the line. If I'm a GM of a basketball team and I'm hiring people, my job is on the line if I hire the wrong talent. So I'm going to hire people that I trust, people that I get, people who I understand. And because our relationships are not diverse and we don't live around one another, we don't have diversity in relationships. And so if I'm going to hire people, because I'm trying to reach a quota or I'm trying to hit a goal, if I'm going to hire people, I'm going to hire people I trust, or people I know, or people that I'm connected to, or people that I can get good references from. Why? So that I can keep my job, right? And if that's the hiring practices, then I'm going to hire people who are 6 degrees connected around me, are people that are connected to. So if my relationships are not diverse, I'm not going to have diversity. And so therefore, if the power structures have one demographic, then we got to recognize that demographic by virtue of just trying to maintain their job and trying to do the best job that they can, they're going to hire people who primarily look like them, talk like them, and act like them. People they have chemistry with, people that they have that they think that they have capacity. But how do you know if someone has capacity? Not through an interview. You understand people have capacity through like references, through people that you trust, and it's like, oh man, I worked with this guy, he was good at this and that, right? But how are you going to do that if you're not interacting? And I think that that is so critical, that we got to understand of why we need to make sure that we are, if it's not affirmative action, that we're doing certain things to making sure that we're leveling the playing field, especially as Christians, that we are providing those opportunities and we're intentionally going out to these opportunities, because you hire people that you're connected. Think about it. Like in your circles, like whether it's the NBA or any of your circles that you have, the coaching carousel kind of stays around the different things. People who have succeeded and failed, they get different opportunities because of relationship, because of proximity, right? That's kind of why you need, if we're going to get freshness, we got to create systems that's going to get us out our natural tendency to try to perform or to accomplish certain things. So we got to recognize our blind spots. And the third one is that we have to be an advocate. This is an issue. Stewardship is an issue of, it's not about having more or having less. It's about stewarding what you have. We recognize God gives some 5 minors and some 1 minor and 5 talents and 2 talents and 1 talent. That is never going away. That is never going away, right? No matter how much we desire, it is never going away, nor do I think it needs to go away, right? But here's the thing. It's not a matter of how much you have. It's about a matter of how you are stewarding what you have. And we need to make sure that we are stewarding what we have to the glory of Christ. And so I think that that is important for us to recognize, that when it comes to things like affirmative action, whether it's time or not time to go, you make that call. But here's the thing, is that the principles of why affirmative action was brought in, biblically, we got to make sure that we are fighting for those things, and that we are making sure that we are being generous with our resources, that we are recognizing our blind spots, and we are advocating that the problem is not, disparity. The problem is stewardship, and we got to be good stewards of what God has given us. So that's what those are my thoughts, my 2 cents on it. I won't be here next week because I'm going to camp next week, but the week after, again, we're going to be talking about marriage, ministry, marriage, and just people who are trying to do things for the Lord. So I'm really excited. Me and Angie are going to be on together. We'll do a week long on it. So I'm excited for you guys, man. Hopefully you have a good weekend. Grace and peace.